Christianity, from its earliest days, grappled with the complex issue of sin and forgiveness. The early Christians, like their Jewish forebears, believed in the possibility of reconciliation with God after wrongdoing. The Gospels themselves are replete with stories of Jesus forgiving sinners, offering them a path to redemption and new life. This emphasis on divine mercy formed the bedrock upon which the concept of indulgences would later be built. However, the early church did not have a formalized system of penance or indulgences. Instead, forgiveness was often sought through acts of public confession, expressions of remorse, and acts of charity. Such practices, often spontaneous and communal, reflected the early church's deep-seated belief in the possibility of God's boundless mercy. While these acts did not erase the consequences of sin, they were seen as vital steps towards spiritual renewal and reconciliation with God and the community. This emphasis on concrete actions underscored the belief that true repentance involved not merely inward sorrow, but also outward manifestation of a changed heart. As the church grew and evolved, so too did its understanding of sin and the process of reconciliation. The early, often spontaneous acts of penance gradually gave way to more structured forms of atonement. This shift towards formalized penance reflected the church's developing understanding of its own authority and its role in mediating God's grace. This evolution would eventually lay the groundwork for the emergence of indulgences as a distinct feature of the church's penitential system. The first few centuries after Christ saw significant changes in how the church approached penance. What was once spontaneous and community-based became more structured. This shift was partly due to the church's growth and the need for more standardized practices. As Christianity spread beyond its initial Jewish roots, it encountered a wider range of cultures and beliefs about sin and atonement. This diversity called for a more uniform approach to guide the faithful and ensure a consistent understanding of repentance. The concept of a more formalized penitential system emerged, where specific sins were met with corresponding acts of penance. This system, while more structured, was still rooted in the belief that true repentance required concrete actions to demonstrate the sincerity of one's remorse. These penances often involved fasting, prayer, almsgiving, or even pilgrimages, each designed to help the sinner atone for their wrongdoing and repair their relationship with God. This period also saw the rise of penitential manuals, guides that listed various sins and their corresponding penances. These manuals, while aiming to standardize penance, also reveal the challenges of classifying and quantifying sin and atonement. The increasing detail and complexity of these manuals reflected the Church's struggle to balance the subjective nature of sin with the need for objective criteria in guiding the faithful towards reconciliation. The move towards a more formalized system of penance, while intended to provide clarity and consistency, also inadvertently laid the groundwork for future abuses. The idea that one could quantify sin and its corresponding penance, while initially intended to guide the faithful, contained within it the seeds of a more transactional approach to forgiveness. This development would, in later centuries, contribute to the crisis that engulfed the Church with the sale of indulgences. The development of the doctrine of purgatory in the medieval Church is crucial to understanding the evolution of indulgences. Purgatory, a state of purification after death for those not fully cleansed of venial sins, offered a theological framework for understanding how indulgences functioned. The belief emerged from reflections on biblical passages that spoke of a final purification before entering heaven, a refining fire that purged away remaining imperfections. This concept resonated deeply with the medieval mind, preoccupied as it was with sin, death, and judgment. Purgatory provided a comforting assurance that even those who died in God's grace but with imperfections still clinging to their souls could attain eternal salvation after a period of purification. This belief arose from a profound understanding of God's mercy, which extended even beyond the grave, offering a final opportunity for souls to become worthy of beholding the divine presence. Indulgences in this context became a way to alleviate the temporal punishment due to sin, even in purgatory. The Church, drawing upon its understanding of the treasury of merits accumulated by Christ and the saints, taught that it could dispense these merits to shorten the time spent in purgatory. This act of intercession was seen as an extension of God's mercy, made accessible through the Church's ministry and the prayers of the faithful. The emergence of purgatory and its connection to indulgences marked a significant shift in the Church's understanding of salvation. It emphasized not just the forgiveness of sins, but also the need for purification and the role of the Church in assisting the faithful in their journey towards heaven, even after death. This development would have profound implications for the practice of indulgences, particularly in the context of the Crusades and the growing emphasis on papal authority. Section 4. Indulgences, a bridge over troubled waters. To grasp the significance of indulgences, one must understand that they were never intended to be get-out-of-jail-free cards. Instead, they represented a spiritual bridge between the faithful on earth and those being purified in purgatory. The Church, as the dispenser of God's grace, could draw upon the treasury of merits, the infinite merits of Christ's sacrifice and the superabundant good works of the saints to remit temporal punishment due to sin. This remission did not erase the guilt of sin or guarantee salvation. It merely lessened the time spent in purgatory. The granting of indulgences became linked to acts of piety and charity, such as prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and pilgrimages. The faithful, by performing these acts with sincere contrition, could gain indulgences either for themselves or for the souls in purgatory. This practice underscored the interconnectedness of the Church on earth, the Church suffering in purgatory and the Church triumphant in heaven. Through indulgences, the living could actively participate in the purification of their beloved dead, demonstrating the enduring power of Christian love and communion. However, the concept of the treasury of merits and its application to indulgences remained complex and open to various interpretations. This complexity, coupled with the growing emphasis on papal authority and the Church's temporal power in the late Middle Ages, would unfortunately pave the way for abuses and misunderstandings that ultimately fueled discontent and dissent. The very practice intended to highlight God's mercy and the communion of saints would become a source of division and controversy within Christendom. Section 5. The Crusades and the Rise of Indulgences. The era of the Crusades, spanning roughly from the 11th to the 13th centuries, witnessed a significant expansion in the practice of indulgences. Pope Urban II, in his famous speech at the Council of Clermont in 1095, promised a plenary indulgence, the complete remission of temporal punishment due to sin, to those who took up the cross and embarked on the First Crusade to liberate the Holy Land from Muslim control. This declaration marked a turning point, linking indulgences directly to military service in defense of the faith. The Crusades, presented as holy wars sanctioned by God, fueled a fervent desire among many Christians to participate in this spiritual quest. Indulgences in this context were not merely seen as a way to atone for one's sins, but also as a mark of God's favor and protection for those engaged in this sacred mission. The Crusades, however, were also marked by violence, bloodshed, and questionable motives, raising questions about the appropriateness of linking spiritual benefits to warfare. The association of indulgences with the Crusades had lasting consequences. It popularized the idea of gaining spiritual benefits through actions beyond traditional acts of piety, such as fighting for a holy cause. This expansion of the scope of indulgences, though well-intentioned, inadvertently opened the door to abuses. The lines between spiritual and temporal motivations blurred, and the potential for exploitation grew as the Church sought to finance these costly expeditions. The Crusades, while ultimately failing to achieve their primary objective of holding the Holy Land, left an indelible mark on the practice of indulgences. The association of spiritual benefits with military service set a dangerous precedent and contributed to the increasing commercialization of indulgences in the centuries that followed. This exploitation would eventually become a focal point of criticism and dissent, culminating in the Protestant Reformation and a reassessment of the nature and purpose of indulgences within the Catholic Church.